There is a mountain in the northern Ural range of Russia that the indigenous Mansi people have avoided for generations. They call it Kolatsyasl. In their language, that name means dead mountain. They do not explain why they avoid it. They do not need to. The mountain explains itself. The story begins not on the mountain, but in a city. January 23, 1959. Sverdlovsk, a Soviet industrial city known today as Yekaterinburg, is locked in deep winter. The temperature has fallen well below freezing, and the sky above the Ural Mountains is the pale, lightless gray of a world that has forgotten what warmth feels like. At the city's railway station, 10 young people gather with heavy packs and ski equipment. They are students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and they are preparing for what they consider a routine winter hiking expedition. These are not beginners. They are Category 3 hikers, the highest level of certification available in the Soviet Union at the time. They have done this before, in conditions just like these. Their leader is Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov. He's 23 years old, technically gifted, physically capable, and meticulous in his planning. He has organized this trip with care. The group's objective is to ski across the northern Urals to a peak called Otorten. It is a difficult route, a grade 3 difficulty winter trek, which even in summer would demand serious mountaineering skill. But these are serious people. Among them is Ludmila Dubinina, 20 years old, passionate and determined. There is Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, a war veteran and experienced outdoorsman, the oldest of the group. There is Yuri Kudavanishchenko, a talented engineer with a gift for humor who always brought a camera. And there are others: Thibaut Brignol, Slobodin, Dorshenko, Kolmogorova, Zolotaryov. 9 of them all told, plus a 10th, Yuri Yudin, who falls ill partway through the journey and is forced to turn back on February 1st. He is 21 years old. He will be the only one who returns home. In his later life, he never stopped trying to understand what happened to the people he left behind in those mountains, and he died in 2013 still searching for an answer that no one could give him. The group documents everything. They carry cameras and logbooks and personal diaries. The final diary entries are cheerful, even playful. There are jokes about food, about the cold, about the effort of skiing through deep snow. There is no sense of dread. There is no premonition. These are young people who love the wilderness, and they are in the wilderness they love, doing the thing they love most with the people they trust. That is what comes next, so deeply, so permanently disturbing. Igor Dyatlov had promised to send a telegram to the Institute's sports club upon the group's safe return, no later than February 12th. February 12th passed. No telegram arrived. The Institute waited. The families waited. By February 20th, the alarm could no longer be ignored, and a search party was organized and dispatched into the Urals. Volunteer student groups went first, then the military became involved, then the police. Aircraft were used to scan the snowfields from above. On February 26, 1959, nearly 4 weeks after the group was last confirmed alive, searchers located the tent on the eastern slope of Kolatsyasl, Dead Mountain. And immediately, even before they understood the full horror of what they were looking at, they knew something was catastrophically wrong. The tent was partially buried under snow, but it was structurally intact. It had not been crushed by an avalanche, it had not been burned, it had not been torn. But the canvas wall, not the door, not any logical exit point, had been slashed open from the inside. The cuts were deliberate, made by a blade from within. Footprints in the snow led away from the tent downslope toward the tree line below. Bare footprints or footprints in only socks. No boots, no warm outer clothing. In temperatures that night of approximately minus 30 degrees Celsius. Let that settle for a moment. These were experienced winter mountaineers. They knew better than anyone alive what minus 30 degrees does to an unprotected human body. Whatever they encountered inside that tent, whatever they saw or heard or understood to be happening, it was so immediately and overwhelmingly terrifying that running out half-dressed into the killing dark was the preferable option. They did not take time to put on boots. They did not grab coats. They cut open the wall of their own shelter and they ran. The first two bodies were found approximately 500 meters from the tent near the tree line, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko, the young engineer who always brought his camera. They were barefoot, dressed only in their underwear. Between them, the remnants of a small fire. They had tried to build warmth. The fire had burned out. Branches had been broken from the surrounding fir trees as high as 5 meters above the ground. Evidence that someone had climbed the trees desperately, perhaps trying to see something in the dark, or perhaps trying to get away from something on the ground below. 3 more bodies were found in the days that followed, positioned in a rough line between the tree line and the tent, as though they had been attempting to walk back, to retrieve clothing perhaps, or to return to shelter. Igor Dyatlov was found with his arms wrapped around a birch tree, frozen. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found face down in the snow, her face badly frostbitten. Rostem Svobodin was found nearby with a small fracture in his skull, a wound that investigators concluded had not been immediately fatal, but had rendered him disoriented, causing him to lose consciousness in the snow. All 5 of the first group showed signs consistent with hypothermia. Terrible deaths, inexplicable in their cause, but at least physically explicable in their mechanism. That would not last. The remaining 4 hikers were not found until May. The snowmelt revealed them at the bottom of a ravine, some 75 meters from the tree line, under 4 meters of compacted snow. And here is where the case stops being a tragedy and becomes something that investigators, forensic scientists, and researchers have spent over 60 decades struggling to categorize. Ludmila Dubinina, 20 years old, the passionate young woman who had insisted on coming on this trip, was found with her tongue, her eyes, her lips, and the soft tissue of her face missing. The areas were not torn, they were not gnawed by animals, as some early reports attempted to suggest, because the surrounding tissue showed none of the marks or bruising consistent with animal predation. The soft tissue had been removed, cleanly, as though by dissection. Alexander Zolotaryov and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol were found with catastrophic internal injuries, fractured ribs, shattered skulls. The forensic pathologist who examined them, Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, stated in his official report that the injuries were caused by an unknown force of large magnitude. And yet, and this is the detail that does not fit any framework, the skin was unbroken. There were no external wounds consistent with the internal injuries, no bruising on the surface of the body that would correspond to the destruction beneath. As though the force had originated from within or had been applied in a way that passed through the body without leaving a mark on its surface. Vozrozdeny, who had spent his career examining violent deaths, had no explanation. He wrote in the official record that the injuries were caused by an unknown force of large magnitude. The clothing of several victims was later found to contain elevated levels of radiation, specifically on strips of fabric from Dubinina's clothing and from Zolotaryo's. This finding appeared in the forensic report and was not publicly acknowledged for decades. When the Soviet state closed the official investigation in May 1959, the stated cause of death was listed as a compelling unknown force. The files were classified. The families were told as little as possible. The mountain continued to sit in the northern Urals, indifferent. When the Soviet Union collapsed and the files were eventually opened to researchers, the inconsistencies multiplied rather than resolved. Witnesses from the Mansi people and from military personnel in the region reported luminous spheres moving through the sky above the Ural Mountains on the night of February 1, 1959, the night the group died. These accounts were corroborated independently by student hikers on a separate expedition in the same mountain range and by workers at a meteorological station 50 kilometers distant. The Soviet military was conducting rocket and weapons tests in the Ural corridor during this period, and certain classified documents have suggested that experimental munitions were being tested that could produce blast wave injuries without external burns or visible impact trauma. But no official confirmation of any such test in that location on that night has ever been released. In 2019, 60 years after the event, Russian authorities reopened the case. Their new conclusion? The hikers had died in an avalanche. The families of the dead publicly rejected this finding. So did most of the independent researchers who had spent years with the evidence. The tent was not crushed. The campsite had been deliberately selected on a low-risk slope. The pattern of the bodies across hundreds of meters in different directions was entirely inconsistent with avalanche behavior. And no avalanche theory accounted for the missing soft tissue or the radiation or the internal injuries without external wounds. The case has a name now, the Dyatlov Pass incident, named after the
young man who led the group. The pass itself was formally named after Igor Dyatlov in the years following the investigation, a quiet acknowledgement by the Soviet state that something had happened there that it could not explain and would not forget. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, the one who turned back sick on February 1st, spent the rest of his long life collecting every document and photograph he could find. He believed his friends had been killed by something connected to Soviet military activity in the region, and he died without ever receiving an answer that satisfied him. The mountain does not offer answers. The Mansi people, who have called it Dead Mountain for longer than anyone remembers, had a reason for that name long before February 1959. Whatever that reason was, it remains their secret. The mountain has its own.
There is a particular kind of fear that arrives not in the dark, not in unfamiliar places, but in the most ordinary room you can imagine. A child's bedroom, a terraced house on a quiet street in a suburb of North London, bunk beds, a chest of drawers, the sound of a television from downstairs. That is where this story begins, and the very ordinariness of the setting is what makes it so difficult to dismiss and so impossible to forget. The address is 284 Green Street, Brimstone, Enfield. The year is 1977. The family living there is the Hodgsons, a mother named Margaret, known to everyone as Peggy, and her 4 children. Margaret is 13, Janet is 11, Johnny is 10, Billy is 7. Peggy's marriage has ended, and she is raising these 4 children alone, working and managing a household on a council estate in North London in the late 1970s, which requires a particular kind of toughness and practicality. She is not a woman given to fantasy. She is not someone who has ever expressed interest in the supernatural. She is a mother who needs to get her children fed and into bed on a school night, and that is exactly what she is trying to do on the evening of August 30th, 1977, when her world begins to come apart. It starts with a sound, a shuffling from the bedroom shared by Janet and Johnny, the kind of sound you instinctively interpret as a child out of bed, playing when they're supposed to be sleeping. Peggy goes to the door. The children are in their beds, but they are awake and they are frightened. They tell her the beds have been moving. She tells them firmly to stop imagining things and go to sleep. She returns to her own room. The shuffling starts again, heavier this time, slower, more deliberate. She goes back, and this time she sees it herself. A large, heavy chest of drawers, solid wood, slides approximately 4 feet across the floor in the direction of the bedroom door. She crosses the room and pushes it back. It slides again. She pushes it a second time, and when she puts her hands on it for the 3rd time and pushes with all her strength, it does not move. Something is holding it in place. She can feel resistance, not the resistance of dead weight, but something active, something pushing back. Peggy Hodgson does not attempt to reason with what is in her home. She picks up her children and she knocks on the door of her neighbor, Vic Nottingham. Vic comes back to the house with her. He is a grown man, not easily startled. Within minutes, he is back outside. He tells Peggy he does not know what is in there, but he is not staying to find out. Peggy calls the police. Constable Carolyn Heaps arrives at 284 Green Street in the early hours of the morning. She is a professional, trained to observe and to document. She enters the living room of the house, and she sees a chair lift from the floor and move 4 feet across the room without any human contact. She submits a written statement to that effect to the Metropolitan Police. This is not a ghost story told around a fire. It is a signed, formal police document filed with one of the most rigorous law enforcement institutions in the world. Constable Brian Hyams attends the house on a separate occasion and provides a corroborating account. The police files on the Enfield case contain multiple officer testimonies describing events they could not explain. The press arrives. The Daily Mirror sends journalist Douglas Bentz and photographer Graham Morris. On their first night at the house, a piece of Lego, a small plastic brick, flies across the room with enough force to strike Morris on the forehead and leave a visible mark. He describes it as feeling like a stone thrown hard. His camera, loaded and ready, captures images over the following weeks that would become some of the most analyzed paranormal photographs in history. Among them, images of 11-year-old Janet Hodgson apparently levitating horizontally above her bed, her body rigid, her expression turned away from the lens, her nightgown hanging down as gravity would require if her body were genuinely suspended in the air. The Society for Psychical Research is contacted. They dispatch 2 investigators to the house, Morris Gross, a businessman who had recently lost his own daughter in a motorcycle accident and had come to believe in his grief that the dead might still be present somewhere, and Guy Lyon Playfair, a journalist and author with a rigorous, skeptical mind and long experience investigating claims of paranormal activity. The 2 men could hardly have been more different in temperament. What they shared was a commitment to documentation. They arrive at 284 Green Street with reel-to-reel audio recorders, cameras, notebooks, and a determination to find a rational explanation for what is being reported. Over the 14 months that follow, they record hundreds of hours of audio. They document objects moving through the air, Legos, toys, small items of furniture. They record pools of water appearing on the kitchen floor from no apparent source, in rooms where no water source was present. They record knocking sounds from within the walls, rhythmic, responsive, occurring in direct answer to questions posed aloud by investigators. Ask the knocking to respond once for yes and twice for no, and it does. Ask it to knock 3 times to confirm it can hear you, and it knocks 3 times. This happens in front of multiple independent witnesses on multiple separate occasions, and then the voice comes. It begins with Janet. She starts to speak in a voice that is not hers, low, masculine rasping, produced from somewhere deep in her chest with a quality that investigators describe as ancient and damaged, like the voice of a man who has spent decades smoking and who is very, very old. The voice gives a name, Bill. Later it elaborates. It says it is Bill Haycock. It says it lived in the house. It says it died in the front room in a chair of a brain hemorrhage, and that it did not know it was dead. Investigators look into this. They find records confirming that a man named Bill Haycock had indeed previously resided at 284 Green Street and had died there. The family had not known this. No one had told them. The voice knew his chair. The voice knew his name. The voice knew details of the house that no one currently living in it had ever been told. The audio recordings of the voice are later analyzed by specialist David Ellis, commissioned by the Society for Psychical Research to determine whether a child of 11 was capable of producing such a sound deliberately. Ellis concludes that the voice is being generated by forcing air through Janet's false vocal cords, a mechanism that is physically painful when sustained, and that causes damage to the throat over time. He notes that after extended sessions of the voice speaking, Janet's throat is red and inflamed. He also notes that the level of fluency, the sustained control, and the duration of the voice's appearances are, in his professional opinion, beyond what any child of her age and training could be expected to maintain through deliberate effort. Playfair, in his detailed account of the case, describes sitting alone in a room with Janet while the voice spoke for over an hour. The girl's face slack, her eyes distant, her body apparently not under her own direction. Not every investigator remains convinced. The researcher Anita Gregory, also commissioned by the SPR, argues that the phenomena are the result of deliberate trickery by the Hodgson children, and she has evidence to support her position. On two separate occasions, both captured by investigators who had deliberately set up situations to test the children, Janet and her sister Margaret are caught bending spoons themselves and are observed attempting to film themselves moving furniture to fake the phenomena. When confronted, Janet's response is disarmingly direct. They were bored, she says, and they wanted to see if they could fool the investigators. It was a game. Playfair and Gross do not deny these incidents. They include them in their documentation. But they argue, and it is not an unreasonable argument, that the existence of two incidents of deliberate fakery cannot be used to retroactively explain 30-plus witnessed events that occurred in the presence of independent observers who had no relationship to the children and nothing to gain from lying. Constable Heaps was not a bored child playing a game. Graham Morris, who was struck hard enough by a flying object to be marked, was not being deceived by two girls with a piece of Lego. The neighbors who called the police before any investigator arrived had no motive to fabricate a story. The complexity of the case is that both things are true simultaneously. The children did fake some things, and something real appears to have happened. The events at 284 Green Street continue for 14 months. The Hodgson family endures it. Peggy Hodgson holds her household together through 14 months of objects flying, voices speaking, investigators arriving and departing, journalists publishing stories, television cameras appearing on her doorstep. Her strength in the accounts of everyone who met her is remarkable. She does not seek attention. She wants her home back. Eventually, it stops. As suddenly and as inexplicably as it began, the activity diminishes, tapers, and ceases. The investigators pack up their equipment and their thousands of pages of notes and their hundreds of hours of audio tape, and they leave. The house still stands on Green Street in Enfield. The current occupants have, on the rare occasions that journalists have contacted them, declined to discuss their experiences. Janet Hodgson, now a middle-aged woman, a mother herself, has given interviews over the years in which she speaks about her childhood with a directness and a steadiness that observers consistently note. She does not perform distress. She does not embellish. She describes what she remembers with the calm of someone who has been living with an unanswerable question for most of her life and has made a kind of peace with not having the answer. She says it was real. She has always said it was real. Morris Gross, who spent 14 months in that house and dedicated much of the rest of his life to studying the case, said the same until his death in 2006. Guy Lyon Playfair, who began the investigation as a skeptic and ended it as something more complicated than that, published his account of the case in a book and spent decades defending his conclusions against critics who had never set foot in the house. Whatever walked the corridors of 284 Green Street in 1977 and 1978, it left its mark on everyone who tried to understand it, and it left no explanation behind. The Atlantic Ocean does not give up its dead. It does not offer explanations. It sits between continents, vast and indifferent, and it keeps everything that falls into it with a possessiveness that has no patience for human curiosity. This is a story about 10 people who disappeared into it, not beneath it, but from a ship that was still floating, still intact, still sailing, and who were never seen or heard from again. Not one of them. Not a single word, a single body, a single piece of wreckage definitively tied to their fate. They were simply gone, and the ocean continued on its way as though they had never existed. The ship was called the Mary Celeste. She was an American merchant brigantine, a two-masted wooden sailing vessel, 282 tons, built in Nova Scotia in 1861, and sold and resold several times in the decade that followed, always somehow finding herself at the center of misfortune. Her first captain died at sea. She ran aground shortly after being launched. She suffered a collision that was not her fault. For a ship of her size and her era, she had accumulated an unusual amount of bad luck before the autumn of 1872 even began. Her captain at that time was Benjamin Spooner Briggs. He was 44 years old, born in Massachusetts into a seafaring family. 3 of his brothers also captained ships. He was known in maritime circles as a careful, devout, and experienced commander. He did not drink. He was methodical. He was the kind of man who double-checked his charts and trusted his instruments and kept detailed logs, and the kind of man you would want at the helm of a ship carrying a valuable cargo across the North Atlantic in late autumn. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, was 30 years old and was traveling with him, as was common practice for a captain's wife on a merchant voyage. Their eldest child, a 7-year-old son named Arthur, had been left at home in Massachusetts with relatives. Their youngest child, a 2-year-old daughter named Sophia Matilda, was coming with them. The Mary Celeste departed New York Harbor on November 7, 1872. Her cargo was 1,700 barrels of commercial-grade alcohol, denatured ethanol, not intended for consumption, bound for a company in Genoa, Italy. The ship's papers were in order. Her provisions were sufficient for 6 months. Her crew of 7, plus the captain, his wife, and the child, made 10 souls aboard. The last confirmed sighting of the Mary Celeste under normal operation was near the American coast shortly after departure. After that, there is only the log. The log is meticulous up to a point. Captain Briggs makes regular entries. The crossing is not without incident. There are references to weather, to course corrections, but there is no indication of serious distress. The final log entry is dated November 24, 1872. The position recorded places the Mary Celeste approximately 100 miles southwest of the Azores Islands. The entry is entirely routine. There is no mention of alarm. There is no mention of illness. There is no mention of any threat, internal or external. After November 24, the log is silent. The pen was put down, the logbook was closed, and whatever happened next left no written record. On December 4, 1872, 10 days after the last log entry, the brigantine Dei Gratia is sailing eastward across the Atlantic, approximately 600 miles off the coast of Portugal. Her first mate, Oliver Deveau, spots something through his glass. Another vessel moving strangely, yawing badly. Her sails partially set but wrong, her course erratic, clearly not under any human direction. As she draws nearer, Deveau recognizes her. It is the Mary Celeste. He knows the ship. His captain, David Morehouse, knows her even better. Morehouse and Captain Briggs are personal friends. They had dined together in New York the week before the Mary Celeste had departed. Morehouse orders Deveau and 2 sailors to row across and board her. They approach the vessel, climb aboard, and stand on the deck of the Mary Celeste. The ocean is moving around them. The ship is rocking gently. The rigging creaks in the normal way of rigging on a ship at sea, and there is no one there. The deck is empty. The wheel is unmanned. There is no sign of the captain, his wife, his child, or any of the 7 crew members. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Nothing broken except what the sea has naturally weathered. The ship is, in every physical sense, perfectly fine. She is simply empty. Deveau and the sailors go below. In the main cabin, the table in the officers' quarters is set as though a meal is imminent or has just been interrupted. Food is in the galley in various stages of preparation. In the captain's cabin, Sarah Briggs's belongings are undisturbed, her clothing folded, her personal effects arranged as a careful woman arranges things. On a small shelf, a phial of medicine, still corked, still sealed, as though she had meant to take it and simply not had the chance. The harmonium organ that she played sits in the corner, sheet music open on its stand. In the child's corner of the cabin, Sophia Matilda's toys, arranged as a child arranges things, slightly chaotically in the way of a 2-year-old who has been playing and then stopped. A reel of cotton thread sits on a sewing machine, already threaded, a piece of fabric tucked under the presser foot, as though the seamstress stepped away mid-stitch and fully intended to return. The ship's chronometer and sextant, the instruments used for navigation, are missing. So is the ship's register. So is the single lifeboat which mounted between the main and foremasts, and trailing behind the Mary Celeste in the water, attached to the stern, is a rope. A long rope, frayed at its far end, frayed under tension, as though it had been tied to something and pulled until it broke. What was on the other end of that rope? The lifeboat, most likely. But the lifeboat was gone, and the people who had been in it, if they had been in it, were gone with it. The British Admiralty Court at Gibraltar convenes a formal inquiry in December 1872, led by the Attorney General for Gibraltar, Solly Flood. Flood is a man of deep suspicion and sharp intelligence, and his suspicion immediately lands on the crew of the Dei Gratia, the rescuers. He examines them closely. He has the Mary Celeste herself examined by a team of marine surveyors. He orders chemical analysis of a sword found aboard the ship, looking for blood. The analysis finds nothing. The surveyors find no evidence of structural damage consistent with collision. They find no evidence of fire. They find no evidence of an explosion, though the hold does show that some of the alcohol barrels have leaked. The wood of the hold is stained and the smell of alcohol vapor would have been strong. This detail, as we will discuss, becomes significant. Flood spends months building a case against Morehouse and his crew. He believes the Dei Gratia's men killed the Mary Celeste's complement, disposed of the bodies, fabricated the story of finding her drifting, and claimed salvage money. He cannot prove it. The evidence does not support it. No motive emerges that withstands scrutiny. No inconsistency in the Dei Gratia crew's accounts is significant enough to sustain an accusation. Flood eventually releases the ship and awards the Dei Gratia a salvage payment, but the payment is set at a fraction of the normal rate, an amount so reduced that maritime historians have long interpreted it as an expression of official unease rather than a conclusion. The court does not know what happened. It suspects something. It cannot say what. It lets the case go. In the years and decades that follow, the theories multiply. One of the most examined concerns the cargo. The 1,700 barrels of commercial alcohol were made of red oak, a wood that is somewhat porous and known to allow seepage. Investigators later determined that approximately 9 of the barrels had leaked. In an enclosed ship's hold, alcohol vapor accumulates. Under the right conditions, a buildup of pressure can cause the hatch covers to blow, not with fire, but with a concussive bang of compressed gas releasing suddenly. Some researchers believe this is what happened, that the crew heard or felt an explosion from below, believed the ship was about to go up, and abandoned her in panic, intending to wait at a safe distance on the lifeboat, attached to the Mary Celeste by the rope that was later found frayed and trailing in the water. The theory holds that the rope broke before they could reboard, the Mary Celeste drifted away from them, and the lifeboat and all 10 souls aboard it were lost in the open Atlantic. It is a reasonable theory. It accounts for the undisturbed state of the ship, the missing lifeboat, and the rope. But it does not account for why an experienced captain like Benjamin Briggs would make the decision to abandon a structurally sound vessel in the open North Atlantic in late autumn, conditions in which a small lifeboat has almost no chance of survival, based on a single explosion with no fire, no actual hull breach, and no flooding. Briggs had been at sea for over 2 decades. He understood probability. He understood risk. He understood that the ocean in a small boat in November is more dangerous than the hold of an intact ship after a gas release. It does not explain, either, why he would take his 2-year-old daughter into an open lifeboat on the Atlantic in winter when she could have stayed aboard the ship, which was not sinking. Benjamin Briggs, Sarah Briggs, and Sophia Matilda Briggs were never found. None of the 7 crew members were ever found. The lifeboat was never found. No wreckage was ever conclusively identified. No survivor ever came forward from anywhere in the world. In the town of Marion, Massachusetts, where the Briggs family had their home, there is a cemetery where headstones stand for Benjamin and Sarah. They are markers only. There are no remains beneath them. There is nothing beneath them but earth. The Mary Celeste herself survived until 1885, when she was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti by her then-owner in a clumsy insurance fraud scheme. He was caught. The fraud was transparent, the investigation brief. The ship was broken up by the sea and by time. Whatever she had witnessed in the 10 days between November 24th and December 4th, 1872, whatever had happened on her decks, in her holds, in the captain's cabin where a woman's medicine sat corked on a shelf, and a child's toys waited on the floor, she carried it with her to the bottom, and she did not share it. The Atlantic received her, as it had received the 10 people she had carried, and it offered nothing in return. It never does. That is the nature of the ocean, and perhaps it is the nature of certain mysteries. They exist at the edge of what human understanding can reach, just beyond the point where evidence becomes explanation, where the known gives way to the permanent and irreducible unknown. 10 people sailed east from New York in November 1872. The ship arrived safely in the middle of the Atlantic. The people did not. And no one, not the Admiralty Court, not the maritime historians, not the forensic analysts, not the generations of researchers who have returned to the case decade after decade, has ever been able to say with certainty where they went.